John here. Just wanted to say thank you so much for listening to Season 2. It has been a blast. It has been so much fun continuing to grow into the fine art of podcasting. And we just got to talk about a bunch of heretics, which was super fun. So we are going to be taking a break for a few weeks as we start gearing up towards Season 3, which is going to have a whole new series that we can't wait to surprise you guys with. We are going to be closing out Season 2 with a banger of an episode that we're very excited to have you listen to. So we hope you enjoy it, and we'll see you in a few weeks. Hey everybody, welcome to Church History for Chumps. My name is John Simon, and I'm here with my wonderful guest.
Oh, me? Do I say hi?
Oh no, that was where Thomas says hi, but that works too. That's great. I mean, you're also my wonderful. Technically, I have two wonderful guests today. And one is my partner in crime, Thomas Duell, and the other is our really wonderful guest, Oisin Feeney.
I was gonna say, I think you just did that because you wanted to have him pronounce his name first.
No, I was ready to do it. I was gonna say the whole thing. Oisin Feeney.
Yeah, I'll take it.
Give me like a 1 out of 10. How was that?
That was about a 4.
Oh gosh, that's way lower than I thought I was gonna get. Okay.
Well, you had it good earlier, but you see, then you overthink it. If I said my name about 20 times, I'd start to doubt my own name. So
that's fair.
So my name is Oisin.
Oisin. All right.
It's an Irish word. In English, it means baby deer. So that's why I kind of stay with the Irish word.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Mr. Feeney is our special guest today, guys. We've actually been really, really excited about having him on for a very long time. And he is the host of the Troubles podcast. And if you're thinking, Troubles podcast, what's that about? Oh, please, we're going to tell you so much about this very, very soon. So before we get into that, let's start us off with a couple shout outs, because that's a good way to kind of get us started here. I think I'd just like to be considerate of our guest. I'd like to shout out everything Irish that I can think of. I'd like to shout out Saoirse Ronan, who's a wonderful actress. I'd like to shout out The Banshees of Inisherin. That's a very good movie that I saw about a year or so ago. Colin Farrell, I think just everything he does. Good beer. Yeah, all my favorite Irish things. So Thomas, what about you, man? What's your shout out for the week?
Solid. I'm going to shout out cold brew coffee. Solid. You know, it's getting hot here in Arizona, so cold brew is good. And I want to shout out one of our big fans, Ellen, who actually is the whole reason why we're having this conversation today with Oisin. Hey, how was that? How did I say your name? Is it better than 4?
Decibly.
Okay. I think you hesitated.
Maybe
that
I'm just
like
too much of a purist, folks. You know, who knows?
Sounded like a 3.5 to me, but I don't know. I'm not Irish. Yeah, guys, you guys are probably wondering, we talk about Ellen all the time, and the reason we do is because she's always chatting us up on Instagram. So you guys could get all this fame and fortune if you wanted, but you just got to hit us up on Instagram. We love to talk about the show and all this other stuff. But yeah, so hey, Oisin, you want to throw a shout out in there?
Yeah, shout out to Killarney, one of those beautiful towns in Ireland. It's where I'm based for the next day while I drive my Americans around, and I'm a guide.
Hey.
And shout out to mountains, because directly after this talk, before the sun sets, I'm hoping to go up a mountain. So
hey, all right, okay, those are great ones. Yeah,
there's this old folk song that I know called "Christmas in Killarney" that I like. I want to visit Killarney one day.
Good place. It's a very good place. So
yeah.
Great pubs. It's going to be hard to drive past the pubs and go to the mountain, because I might just leave the car and go straight to the pub. But you need to earn the pint. Not as fun.
Oh man. All right. Well, Oisin, again, dude, thank you so much for jumping on board the podcast with us. We've been really excited about this. Yeah, you've been a host of your own Troubles podcast, and geez, it's been several years. How long has the show been going for?
Yeah, it'd be going on about 4 years now, I think. I launched the lockdown, so 2021, I think.
Okay.
So I'd kind of already been working on it for about 6 months, and then the lockdown happened just at the basic release time.
Yeah.
So I guess serendipitous in a way. I don't necessarily think the lockdown benefited it, but it was just the way it worked out. I launched the week that Ireland went into lockdown. So March 20 or 21? 20,
Sure.
I think. Can't
Okay.
remember.
Yeah, yeah, no worries. And yeah, so we're gonna be talking about the troubles. Also, before we get into it, I'm sure this has been like mentioned quite a bit by tacky like stand-up comedians, but the troubles is it's a pretty light term considering what it's referring to, right? It seems kind of mild.
Yeah, it's probably what some would refer to as a diminutive of a moment,
Yeah.
because everything related to Irish, Northern Irish, and English history is extremely divisive, especially when it comes to Northern Ireland.
Mm,
So Troubles is what people would argue is the British trying to play down what was a war. So people in Northern
Mm.
Ireland from kind of who believe in Ireland and nationalists, they would say this is definitely a war. Whereas the
mm.
British were saying, no, it was just troubles. It was the troubles. It was a
Right.
very
Yeah.
way of talking it down and kind of making it not seem like it was as severe as it was. And as we're probably about to find out, it's pretty severe period in history.
Sounds.
Maybe before we dive in, I'd really am curious to hear about what got you started on this project. Were you a historian before, or was this something that just interested you a lot and you had done a lot of reading on? Like, what led you to
No,
this
no, I'm
place?
kind of one of those weird situations where I really am not I'm not afraid to admit I went into this podcast with nothing, with absolutely no knowledge. I'd wanted to start podcasts for years. I loved This American Life and the Moth and storytelling podcasts. And then I just said, okay, it's been 10 years of me listening to them, and let's make something. I loved Case File, the Australian podcast.
I
I loved
love
Dead.
that podcast.
I love the way that doesn't impart any opinion. So it puts it out there and you come to whatever. And I like that. I think that's a really good way to. So I was like, okay, I want to do that. I don't want to just jump into the true crime niche because it's really oversaturated.
Mm,
So how can I do something that'd be different and not needed, but something that'd be kind of useful? And then I found out about, the troubles in Northern Ireland. I live in near to Dublin. So to drive across the border into Northern Ireland is about an hour and 10 minutes away. And most Irish people have very little, they just think Northern Ireland's eventually going to be a part of Ireland. We don't think too hard about it. We don't think too
Mm.
much about the nuance or the differences. We know there was violence in the past. We think that's finished. Um, and then I'd done a couple of trips up there, and I kind of, I was meeting up with a friend. We were working together to promote the Causeway Coast, which is this beautiful scenic part of Northern Ireland. And she's from a Protestant background. And when her mom heard my name, she was like, Oisin Feeney is picking you up. Her mom was terrified that I, because her mom grew up around people like me who were killing people and carrying out bombings, in the name of Ireland. So suddenly her daughter was going off to spend 3 days driving with a guy. And I was shocked because I was like, afraid of me? Like what? And then she ended up showing me a couple of the police stations up there and how all the police stations are still wrapped in big metal cages and there's
oh
petrol
my
bombs.
gosh.
And I was like, I do not know this in any way that I thought I did. Northern Ireland makes so little sense to me. And then I found out about, like, say, the assassination of Lord Louis Mountbatten. So he was a British royal who, during the height of the Troubles, was it 1972 or 1974, he was holidaying in the Republic of Ireland, and it wasn't really a great look to be, as this bombings and all these things were going off. Like, this British royal was going to have his summers in the Republic of Ireland, and the IRA kind of targeted him. So he went out in a boat one day to go collecting his lobster pots, and the IRA had planted a bomb there the night before in the boat. And then from the sea or from the shore, somebody detonated the bomb.
Oh my
So
gosh.
the eyes of the IRA, killing a British monarch was a huge success, but they did that at the expense of, I think, six other people, including two children. So they were
Mm.
willing to blow up children to get to their goal. And I think that's one of those very serious ethical questions that happens throughout the Troubles. Like, is there any justification for this? And then the quest to find the killers and then what happened. In my head, I was like, there's a whole narrative story here. There's what happened, there's the ethics of what happened, there's the case, there's catching the guys, there's what happened afterwards. And I was like, for me, that has that narrative storytelling aspect of kind of telling you history, but making it quite interesting because it has your A, B, C plot points.
Sure.
And then I just kind of said to myself, okay, as a person from the Republic of Ireland, this is a very difficult, not digestible point in history for me. So how the heck are Americans, how the heck are English people going to learn about this if there's nothing online in this sense? There's chaos everywhere. There's books written everywhere. There's documentaries deep into YouTube, but there's no kind of place. And I suddenly found a gap that I figured there could be a place there. So long-winded answer, guy. Sorry, but long-winded answer. But I'm a fairly long-winded person. But
No, that's okay. That's okay. That was also a fantastic answer. Um, yeah, because one of the questions I wanted to ask was how much do you feel the Troubles is kind of ingrained in the because I think that being removed from it and being here in the States, you just kind of assume like, oh, the Troubles, like they're always talking about it, everyone's very familiar with it, so hearing that is actually really impactful. But I think before we get any farther, let's try to give, just for anyone listening, like a very like baseline kind of definition of what the Irish Troubles were and are, you know.
sure, yeah. Do you want me to give? Will I give it?
Yeah, go for it. Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So I guess Ireland, again, there's going to be dates wrong here, guys. There's going to be a couple of incorrection parts, but the overall momentum of the story will be preserved.
Sure.
So let's say Ireland was kind of in the 1200s, was a bunch of different clans and chiefs fighting for superiority. And then there was eventually, there was then the British and then there was the Normans. And the Normans were based out of France, but they had a connection with the British as well. I always get this part mixed up. But in everyone says the British invaded Ireland first, but in fact, we kind of invited them in, especially one High King called Dermot MacMurrough. He invited Strongbow, Richard de Clare, I think his name is, into the country because he said, okay, if we can take the Norman might, if I marry this guy to my daughter, we can use their might to expand our land. And when the Normans came in, they realized, geez, this country is kind of ripe for the taking. We can take land, we can build our castles, we can spread across the country. But the Norman relationship with the British at this stage, with the English monarchy, was that they were like regents or like knights. But this kind of put fear into the English monarchy. They said if the Normans gain a lot of power and stronghold over here, they might use Ireland as a springboard to invade us. So then they said, well, we better go over there and invade and make sure that doesn't happen. So that would be considered kind of the start of kind of the invasion of Ireland. And it's messy and it goes on for centuries. But let's kind of pull things up to the we say mid 1600s. This could be incorrect. But this is when the English is in control of Ireland and they're trying to figure out, okay, how do we pacify the native Irish? How do we get them to come around to our way of thinking? How do we get them to change their religion and all this sort of stuff? So, one of the big things, the ideas put forward was like, look, they're not going to change, but what if we have plantations? If we send over our native people and people from Scotland and they have plantations around Ireland, we can slowly grow our influence and kind of plant the country and kind of make it our own as opposed to make it Irish. So these plantations, for the most part, were all over Ireland, but they were relatively unsuccessful. They dwindled out. Irish people fought back. And the settlers were like, well, feck this, I'm going home. This is not worth it for me, except for one place. And that is the region of Northern Ireland, which encompasses 6 counties of the 32 that make up all of Ireland nowadays. So primarily Scottish Protestant people were sent out, came over, and had their own plantations. And were planted on the land in the sense they were given large pieces of land. The Irish people were like, well, what about us? Where do we go? And the famous phrase is, well, you can go to 2 places. You can go to hell or you can go to Connacht. Connacht is on the west coast of Ireland and the land is terrible. It's all stone. It's gorgeous, but it's impossible for any sort of, what was important at this time was good land to plant. To grow grain, to grow that sort of stuff, of which Northern Ireland was the breadbasket. So these planters, I think that's an offensive term, but these people who came and settled on the land from Scotland, they were given massive patches of land. And then the Irish remained, but they could never necessarily own the land and they could never move up in their status. So that's like, say, the mid 1600s. So let's fast forward to the 1950s. So this wealth disparity that was 300 years ago remained. And as a result, as we enter the 1950s, the 1960s, you have maybe the percentage is something around 60% Protestant, 40% Catholic. And you have what by all means was I'm sorry, when I say Protestant and I say unionist, that's the same person. A Protestant is from England, a unionist is someone who wants to keep the union with Great Britain. When I say Catholic and I say nationalist, they're the same person. A Catholic, a nationalist is a person who wants to be with the Republic of Ireland. So Northern Ireland is its own country in 1950. It's a part of the United Kingdom. It's Northern Ireland, Wales, Scotland, England. Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, is its own independent country, separate from all of that, and we fought for that and all that sort of stuff in the 20s, or anyway, 20s. So, where's my train of thought going now? Give me 2 seconds. Oh yeah, okay. So the wealth disparity remained, but also like what they described Northern Ireland during this period is a unionist country for a unionist people. So, for example, like unionists slash Protestants, interchangeable, could work. They were only allowed to work kind of teachers, firemen, policemen. They were only able to get those jobs. Catholics could not. They were given priority for social housing. They were given priority for everything. They were given, if the way you voted back then was if you owned a property, you could vote. Catholics owned significantly less property than the Unionists. So it meant that all the votes were still always going to be in favor of Unionists. And then what was kind of the biggest one? I guess gerrymandering was a huge thing. So if there was an area of Northern Ireland that was predominantly Catholic, where they could get representation and have representation in the House of the, what's it called? Where politics is held. My brain is not working today. That area would be gerrymandered up in such a way that they would always be the minority. So it would be sliced up and divided up. So, the Catholic population kind of realized, well, we are a second-class citizen in our own country. We're not afforded the same rights. We can't get jobs in all of the places, the shipyards, all of these places are locked down just for Protestants. So with the freedom, what was it, secondary education or college education was made free, which really, really benefited the Catholic population. And then with the civil rights movement in the US, with the Catholic population saying, hang on, they're the same as us. We're the second-class citizen. We're being treated. We don't have equal rights. So the nationalists started then peacefully protesting for better rights for themselves. This is mid-60s, late 60s. And then as we kind of go forward a little bit, no, actually, we're still right there. The nationalists are peacefully protesting for rights. And then the police force at the time, the RUC, is standing back while unionists, the small group of unionists, are attacking them violently. And they're looking to the police going, help us. And they're like, well, you're nationalists. Us as a police force, we're unionists. We're not particularly interested in helping out here. Then the police force started attacking the people. And then things just got really, really, really chaotic. So much so that the British government then sent in the British Army. And at that time, the nationalist population said, oh, thank you. The British Army is here. They will save us from a biased police force and a small percentage of the unionist population that wants to attack us violently. And then the British Army ended up shooting civilians in the back during Bloody Sunday. And then kind of all hell broke loose. Then that's where the IRA started to really, really ramp up what they were doing. There was the official IRA at the start of the Troubles, who were a bit more socialist, left-leaning. And everyone was like, where are you? Where are you to save us and protect us against these people killing us? And that's where the provisional IRA came. They said, we're going to be action. We're going to carry out attacks. We're going to kill soldiers. And that's basically, then the hit the fan, guys, if I can curse in this podcast, I don't know. Because then it just became it just descended into abject chaos. Bombings, shootings every single day, tit for tat killings for 30 years.
Mm-hmm. Something that I'm curious about that I read that I'm not sure I understood completely, or I don't know enough about British history to know if this is true, but I read something that indicated that the British Army operation in Ireland was going to be like the longest British Army operation there ever was. For one, I just didn't realize how long the Troubles, so to speak, lasted for. But then was there like standing military operation literally for 3 decades from this point on?
More or less, yeah. It wasn't until the peace agreements that the army left. So yeah, I know it was the largest single deployment. Was it since the Falklands or since World War II? But it was a big, big, big deployment. They sent in gunships, and the gunships were an old warship, I guess, that was used as like a floating prison. And look, they didn't make very good decisions. They did this thing called internment, where they took information about like suspected IRA members and they just like mass arrested 1,000 people. They kept them in pretty unpleasant circumstances. And there was no legal rights. In a lot of cases, there was faulty faulty intel that got these people arrested. So when 1,000 of these people got released after being held for weeks and months at a time, like a lot of people went and joined the IRA, because they made steps every time like Bloody Sunday was the single largest recruitment drive for the IRA in the entire Troubles because innocent people were shot in the back, civilians who were just walking unarmed. With regards to the longest campaign in British military history, that sounds correct, but I don't know if it is or not, but it sounds right.
Yeah. Your episode on Bloody Sunday, I listened to a couple weeks ago, and I thought it was really, really well done. It seems like what kind of my takeaway, and you can correct me if you think I'm off here, was that there was so much tension that had been built up, and the British and kind of Northern Irish police forces were were almost like so on edge about what they thought could happen that they ended up actually provoking all of the violence and then ended up killing a bunch of unarmed people. So it's almost like this was a sign of this kind of like tangible tension that existed, but it also was a clear indicator that it was the Irish who were outgunned from the beginning. And yeah, I don't know. Like, where would you say? What would you say about that?
Look, again, Bloody Sunday was a peaceful protest, and these peaceful protests had a tendency for youths, like young teenagers, to break away and kind of throw stones and throw rocks at these massive army checkpoints. And when I've talked to a soldier about this, I've heard this before. Like, the regiment that were set in were 2 PARAP, which would be considered shock troops designed to operate in very a heavy war environment. So someone said to me once, "Oh yeah, they're the wrong troops that should have been sent in." But the soldier was like, "Look, all troops are, they're trained for this sort of stuff." So they were probably the wrong troop to have been sent in for one. And then it was, it was the tension was just so much that once literally one gunshot set them off.
Yeah.
The one we don't know, was it some guy from the official IRA firing a pot shot in their direction, but then suddenly you had just a significant difference. People were running, people were shot in the back. It was. It was. I think the overall ruling at the very, very end of the line was like a lack of gun discipline or a lack of blah blah blah. But there are still family members to this day trying to get prosecutions to the soldiers who shot their loved ones over 50 years ago. So, and that's pretty hot potato. I can't remember what your question was, but I just kind of started and kept going.
No, that was you answered it perfectly without even.
Okay.
Yeah. My understanding of the reason why the religious lines are where they are between the Protestants and the Catholics, and again, correct me if I'm wrong here, was that the Protestant Reformation hit England like so much that kind of like they kind of swung in this like Anglican Protestant direction, but it didn't influence Ireland in the same way. And so you've got Ireland, who's been historically Catholic, and now England, which is now at this point in history very Protestant, and that's kind of where the lines came in. Is that more?
They wanted to impose their religion upon the Irish people, and the Irish people wanted to maintain their religion. So,
so they weren't just like, let's peacefully do our own thing.
No. Like, Irish people practiced Catholicism out in the bushes, out in fields. Absolute secrecy for a long time. And then during the famine in the 1850s, it's a term we still use today, but like they were like, look, you're starving to death. We will give you soup if you change religion, if you become a Protestant. So nowadays there's a term for people like, oh yeah, he took the soup or she took the soup, which means she's
wow.
like a turncoat or something. But it's a term I've heard my parents use angrily at somebody. But so it was kind of wielded in a bit of a nasty way, I guess. And then I think the late 1800s is where Daniel O'Connell fought for it's called the Great Emancipator, but he fought for freedom of religion for the Catholic Irish.
Yeah, but
was there any element of the Troubles that actually ended up taking distinctly religious lines outside of just the nationalist versus unionist distinctions that just went along with the two religious camps, or was there any like religious element that was, what's that?
Rephrase that question. I don't fully understand it.
Yeah, I guess as the Troubles unfolded, was there anything driving some of the division that actually had a religious component to it, or was it pretty much always primarily about land and autonomy?
I think in the days like, because religion has been so important and it has kind of fallen off a cliff in Ireland in the past 20, 30 years.
Mm.
So at the time, it was kind of a huge deal if you were a Catholic versus if you were a Protestant. If a girl was going out with if a Catholic girl was going out with a Protestant guy, you just didn't tell anybody. It was a dirty secret kind of. Yeah, it's messy because some of the Protestantism that was practiced over here, especially by certain people, was very, very fire and brimstone is kind of the way I use it. So I don't really necessarily mean that in a derogatory manner, but like, you've Ian Paisley. Ian Paisley was probably one of the biggest players in the Troubles. He was a unionist politician who many believe stoked the flames, and he inspired people to go out and commit acts of violence. Whether he did or not, whether he funded it or not is still up for debate. But like, this would be in a very devoutly Protestant town. So, on a Sunday, the quote I remember from the episode the most is that the playground is chained up because kids do not play on a Protestant Sunday. That's a day for your relationship with God. It's a day to be with your family at home. So yeah, so your question is asking me, is the Troubles, how much of a role does religion play in the Troubles? And I feel like the answer is significant, but I'm having a bit of a tough time getting an answer to it in the head. Like, Ian Paisley believed that the Pope was the Antichrist. Ian Paisley would be screaming at the Pope, "You're the Antichrist, you're the Antichrist." And I have an interesting episode coming up about kind of me trying to understand unionism. But from the basics that I kind of understand is unionism and Protestantism is a bit more like, I have my own belief system, I have my own independence, you can't tell me what to believe. And they view Catholicism as, and kind of, Irish nationalism, a little bit like European. Catholicism is like, well, you're just told what to do by the Vatican. You're at the behest of someone else dictating your life and your belief system. Whereas our belief system is our own personal belief system. I think in a way that's how some unionists / Protestants would view kind of and they wouldn't want to be under that banner in any way.
Interesting.
But yeah, like, that's a really good question. I'd like to research and like write an episode about, to be honest. I think it's honestly, because it's one I don't feel like I'm answering very well, but I think it'd be a really good question to genuinely, because it's a very obvious thing, Catholic versus Protestant, but to actually sit down and analyze it, I think it'd be quite interesting.
Well, and it's fascinating, like you said, because, and this was definitely something I wanted to discuss too. Religion in Ireland, I mean, and really throughout most of Europe, like Thomas and I have done some studying through some of our courses that have talked about how one of the many reasons some historians say for the downfall of people attending religious, like people identifying as religions throughout Europe, is because of the bloodshed and warfare that kind of came with it. And that was synonymous with it for a while. And like, when you look at what's happened between Ireland and Northern Ireland and the UK, like it's like this condensed sense of like militant, like prejudice and violence between the Protestants and Catholics and all that. And so I think what's really interesting to me, like, I think I heard a joke one time that it was someone asked an Irish person whether they were a Protestant or a Catholic, and they responded that they were an atheist. And then the person said, "No, but are you a Catholic atheist or a Protestant atheist?" like it doesn't matter what you believe.
I don't believe in a God. Oh yeah, which God do you not believe in?
Right.
So yeah,
right, exactly.
Like, oh God, there's so many jokes that dairy girls put on the stage, like, well, Protestants put their toaster in the cupboard and Catholics leave it out, and like, I was chatting to a guy who was always asked, what foot do you kick with? If you're left-footed, you're Catholic. If you're right-footed, you're not. Like, there was all this. But again, I think to not really, like, Catholic Protestant was just another line in the sand. Catholic Protestant, English, Irish, these were just reasons to have binary opposition and to other a person. And I find it so funny because in theory, like in reality, in my head, Catholicism and Protestantism they're not super far away from each other in branches of Christianity, I guess, which they are, I think. But like, when you compare other world divisiveness and based on religiousness that is so different from each other in their belief systems, these ones are not too far away from each other, and it's still, it caused such strife. And again, it's down to the fact that it's more than just the religious divide. It's your culture. Irish, it's really hard to describe this, but like Irish sport, Irish culture was so enshrined with Catholicism The two were very hard to separate and still are to this day. So, you'd have like, the Irish language, people would be trying to get estates in Northern Ireland to change from well, had to have both the Irish language and the English language. And to this day, people are protesting that. They don't want that because they feel like any step forward is a step backwards for them and their belief system. So it's just very hard to peel Catholicism off nationalism and that sort of stuff because they're just so mixed together,
Sure. Yeah. This might turn into a little bit of a tangent, but have you ever seen a movie with Brendan Gleeson called Calvary?
That was good.
Oh, it's really good. It's really good. So he plays a small town priest, and it's by, what's the director's name? McDonough's the last name. It's not Martin McDonough. I think it's his brother. But it's basically a movie about like I see it, and I would love to hear your opinion on this after you watch it. I see it as a movie that kind of represents Ireland's continued affiliation with Roman Catholicism, but also their distancing from it. Because you've got this priest who's like a very affable, very lovable guy. He's respectable. He takes his faith seriously, and people like respect him, but they also just kind of talk down to him, and they don't really care about him that much.
Well, like 40 years ago, like 50 years ago, to be a priest was the highest possible like honor,
Mm-hmm.
But Irish people are angry. Irish people are really, really angry. My generation is furious. My dad's generation would still be hanging on to it a little bit, but they're so furious. We
Yeah.
were like the things that happened in Ireland over the past 100 years in the name of the Catholic Church are absolutely abhorrent. And it's, if you want, I can go into them a little bit, but it really is just like I can see why so many people have turned away from religion and
Yeah.
how specifically Catholicism in Ireland have done nothing to try and make amends for the awful things that were done in their name.
Mm-hmm.
So will I explain a little bit, or do you want to? I'll keep it fairly PC, but you
No,
don't have to.
tell
Sure,
us
yeah.
more. Yeah.
Well, like take your pick, like in Ireland, like there was a lot of industrial schools. So boys who were very, very, they were either their parents were too poor to keep them or they were just badly behaved. They'd be sent to industrial schools. And in their hundreds, these boys died mysteriously. There are graveyards for boys who went to industrial schools all over Ireland, children who were killed by wicked priests, essentially. And then, we have like over in Tuam, I went there with Ellen, but we have what's called a laundry, which is if a woman gets pregnant out of wedlock in Ireland in the early to mid 1900s, she'd be sent away, essentially institutionalized, because it's such a sin to get pregnant out of wedlock.
Mm-hmm.
So they'd be committed to these laundries where they would literally do laundry, these massive big, laundry facility their entire lives. Their baby would be born, and in some cases would be illegally adopted out to the States. They'd never see their baby again, and in some cases these women would be institutionalized and never released from these places for the rest of their lives. But there was a mother and baby home that was excavated 15, 20 years ago, and the septic tank was unveiled, and in the septic tank was the bodies of 170 babies.
Oh my
that
gosh.
all stuffed down that were killed. There's a woman in the 60s who, where was this? I'm going to do something about this because every time I hear about the anniversary, it drives me mad. She was pregnant out of wedlock and she went into labor early, and she went to one hospital and they wouldn't let her in because she wasn't married. She went to a second hospital and they wouldn't let her in because she wasn't married. And she died in childbirth in a barn on her own on a cold, dark night. Because this is how Catholicism in Ireland got so warped, and wielded. And then I didn't even start on sex abuse by priests. We can leave that one out. So it's just, I really, really understand why. And I'm angry. I'm really angry at the church. I never really want to go back because of how it was wielded in our country and used to damage us and control us. And we were grown up to feel guilt. We weren't grown up to feel love. So my entire generation were raised to repeat after me in a church and feel guilt and shame. And that's not what religion should be. I feel religion when I go up a mountain and I can smell the trees and I can hear the river. That's me interacting with God. So anyway, we're on a big tangent here. But
no. I love this. This is great. And we have a good friend, Thomas and I, who's been on the show a couple times. His name is Brad Mella, and he's kind of working through this idea that throughout church history, because of the kind of big, traumatic, awful events that the church has experienced, that the church has basically, almost in the same way that like a family will internalize generational trauma based on the things that they experience, like the church has almost incorporated that, maybe not so much into its teachings, but into how it expresses those teachings. And that, like, I mean, one thing I love to look at, because I think this is very, very clear to see in the history books, is like, you look at when the Black Plague just like ravaged through a third of Europe throughout just like a decade. And you've got all these Christians and even priests who are like, God is mad at us. Like, God is angry at the things that we're doing, and he wants us to like clean up our lives. So now they've internalized this idea that if you come into misfortune, it's because God is kind of like up there wielding this like cosmic paddle and just like whapping you across the wrist. And so, like over time, I think that the church has really internalized this idea of like, if we can make people feel guilt and shame for their horrible, offensive sins, then we can really bring them back on the right path. And then you look at like the scriptures that have inspired all this stuff, and it's freedom from shame, and it's like breaking guilt, and it's saying that like actually Christ was the one. Yeah, it's actually like, well, hey, Jesus actually bore all of this shame on our behalf, and to be one with him is to stand without any condemnation. And even if you are a pregnant girl without a husband, one, you're still very much entitled to love because you're made in the image of God. But also, like, holy smokes, like redemption is through the love and kindness that we share with those who are struggling, not with this divine sense of retribution. So I think the church throughout Europe has expressed that a lot. And I honestly really just feel bad for those who have just been really affected by that kind of history, because those stories just break my heart. And, here in the States, like, we've got such this could be a way farther tangent, but our church culture dynamic has a lot of skeletons in its closet too. So there's a lot to go through there. But anyways, that was just my thoughts of that. But I'm not even sure where I'm going anymore. Thomas,
well, like I said, I'd like people to come back to religion. I don't think I'll ever come back, but I'd like if it opened up. I was at a memorial service for a friend a couple of weeks ago, and like, I don't know, you see, all of Ireland is just the ruins of churches. We have ruins of churches everywhere, and I love exploring them, and I'm fascinated with them. But I felt sitting in one the other day. I just felt this one's going to fall. This is just going to be again, because we're just here to repeat after me, repeat this, so I won't be this. There was no, I don't know. I've been to a couple of services in my life. I went to a couple of Quaker services and stuff. And I'm fascinated with religion, but I just feel like where it is now, it has not done anything to try and make amends for the 100, 200 years of a vice grip it did in this country. And that's a shame. I think that's a real shame.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, man. Thomas, you want to throw something out there, man?
Yeah, I've got a question. So I was looking at your podcasts, and it looks like you're systematically working through the troubles. Is that how you're doing it? Slowly working your way forward?
No, I'm doing completely in non-chronological order. So every episode is completely out of sequence.
I saw that wrong then. Okay.
So I just didn't like the idea of doing a podcast that was like 1 to 300. I find that quite daunting if you're a new listener and you're like, oh, geez, I'm going to fall all the way back. So I've made up this word called like jigsaw education. And the objective is every episode you can dip in, dip out without too much pre-context, very little in most. It's just, I don't know, my listeners are kind of coming with me now a little bit. So some of the recent episodes have gotten a bit more complicated. But for the most part, you should be able to jump in and jump out of any episode, and it'll gradually fill in your image of this period of time. That's the objective.
That's great. That's how we've done ours well, and it's worked well that way.
I like it, yeah. I think it's a good setup.
It's fun because sometimes you'll see how things you've covered in the past kind of inform a new topic. And that's always like, oh, this is like, oh, it's all kind of fitting together.
Yeah. I have listeners to reach out and they appreciate that, you know.
Yeah, that's really cool. Shoot. Yeah.
I've
Uh,
got another question.
yeah.
So we haven't really talked, at least on this episode, of kind of maybe what the culmination of these events is and how the troubles ended. But I get the sense that even to this day, there's some enduring tensions. And you talked about how, you were in Northern Ireland and saw things that you didn't even expect to see. So how would you kind of trace from where it started to today, and what still seems to be like some enduring questions for that part of the world?
Well, to do that, I'll probably need to explain a little bit about how it ended. So if you don't mind, I
Yeah.
can.
Yeah, no, that's what I would love to hear.
Tit for tat killings, bombings, assassinations, like really, really significant things took place over a 30-year period. The IRA was getting a lot of support around the world. So the IRA got a lot of a lot of funding from FARC in Colombia in exchange for giving FARC information on how to make these mortar bombs. The IRA was very proficient at making bombs. And the most important player, I guess, when it comes to funding the IRA, a lot of the US support, but I guess the big player was Muammar Gaddafi from Libya. So he
Wow.
provided so much Semtex explosives, guns, ammunition, millions and millions of money that was funneled in through Ireland through an Irish priest, actually, which is a little bit of that's a different story in itself. But Gaddafi's main point of contact was Father Patrick Ryan.
Wow.
Yeah, the church wasn't too happy with him, as one can imagine. Anyway, so with a lot of guns, with a lot of these were huge weapons super dumps that were hidden underground in the Irish Republic as we're going into the early to mid 90s. The IRA was poised to continue this war of attrition. They were, they wanted to wage war against the British Empire or the British security services. By means of two ways, by the Armalite or the ballot box. We will get independence if we have to fight for it or if we have to vote for it. But at the same time, the IRA was severely weakened. You know, the British security services had so many agents and informers, so many, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people. It was very difficult for the IRA to operate in any meaningful way without something being scuppered. So in the end, even though they were armed to the teeth, and also this is about time, they were seeing their grandkids walking through the streets with these army trucks. These members who've been they're taking part in a war against the British for 30, 40 years. Nobody wants that to continue. No one wants to grow up with that. So there was two failed peace agreements. And then by the early to mid 90s, the Good Friday Agreement, which would be otherwise known as the Belfast Agreement, both sides don't even call it the same thing, was cobbled out, and that was an agreement that said Northern Ireland, there was kind of things given on both sides. Northern Ireland is one of the four countries that makes up the United Kingdom. And then the Republic of Ireland had to take something off their constitution stating that. So that was kind of giving a little bit to one side. And then the other parts of the agreement said, but if the majority of the people choose to want to have a vote on to unify, then that can be allowed. So that was the Good Friday Agreement. But the most contentious aspect of that agreement was also anybody who committed any crime on any side, once it was for a political reason, they would be released. So I think 300 people who had killed people were released over the next 2 years. And that was a very hard pill to swallow for everyone. You're losing, somebody who blew up 50 people in a bomb. Well, no, 20 people in a bomb was released. So very hard pill to swallow. And then if you kind of have this weird little political sphere finger thing going on, and my face is the middle ground. So the people who cobbled out the Good Friday Agreement, the two main parties were the SDLP, they're nationalist, they're, on the Irish side, and the UUP, the Ulster Unionist Party. So these would be both, the SDLP were centre left, and the Ulster Unionist Party were centre right. So they were fairly, how do I describe this? They were fairly not too on the fringes for parties. So they cobbled out the agreement together with a lot of help from the US, and a lot of help from the British and Irish governments. And the agreement said, okay, these sides will have a nationalist and a unionist leading together. There'll be, there's a fancy word for it, but, forevermore in Northern Ireland, we'll have one from each side leading together and our country will work in peace. Sounds great. Didn't really work very well. So over the past 27, 29 years, the UUP, center right, and the SDLP, center left, have fallen off a cliff, and everyone has gone out to the far fringes. So now it's the dominant nationalist party is Sinn Féin and the dominant unionist party is the DUP. The DUP would be considered very draconian, or like, some members of the DUP wouldn't believe that dinosaurs exist or wouldn't believe, gay rights and everything. They'd be very, so if you're a unionist in Northern Ireland and you're a progressive young, like gay guy, you don't really have a party representing your needs or representing the belief system. So it's a little bit difficult because things have gotten more out on the edges, and the agreement itself didn't make any provisions for building bridges across each other. They just calmed down the violence, and they did a great job. For the 30 years of the Troubles, over 3,000 people were killed. And in the nearly 30 years afterwards, that number is way down to less than 300. Still a significant number, but a lot less. And then, one of the daftest parts of the agreement in my head is these two sides have not led together in peace and prosperity. When they fight, the other person can throw a fit and collapse the entire government. So, and that's happened 3 or 4 times now. So in the 26 years, we'll say, that the government has been running, 9 of those years have been collapsed. Wow. So people in Northern Ireland are waiting for their government to do something, and they're doing nothing. So that's frustrating. That's annoying for everybody. And the way I call it is bread and butter issues. These are people who don't care about what side of the fence you're on. They want your taxes and your government to move forward. So, so how do I bring that fully up to now? With, I guess, Brexit happening in Northern Ireland, Northern Ireland essentially leaving the European Union, that's messy. That's really, really messy, because a very important part of the island of Ireland is that there's no borders on the entire island. In the sense that if you're Northern Irish and you're a nationalist, you can come to the Republic of Ireland. There's no manned checkpoint borders. But now Northern Ireland is not in Europe, and you can essentially leave Europe and walk across into Northern Ireland, and that's really messy. So, and Brexit also didn't do anything for the unionist population in Northern Ireland, who feel like England, the British government, is ignoring them and saying, you're giving too much to the nationalist population, you're letting them away with much, and you're I feel like unionists in Northern Ireland are in a sense being backed into a corner a little bit. That could potentially lead to violence in the future. These are kind of lofty things, guys. I hope I'm not kind of making it confusing, because it's kind of hard to get.
No, it's actually really helpful.
What was the relationship of the EU with the situation of the Troubles? Did they sympathize towards one side or the other? Were they trying to kind of pacify both sides?
Oh, I'd say, to be honest, quite little.
Yeah.
At the time, for the most part, it was all about the Irish government, the English government, and the Americans. The Americans were super important in trying to cobble down peace. But the American governments were getting in trouble as well, because they were perceived to be a biased side, who were like, oh, well, we support Irish nationals. So look at Joe Biden just last year. He was like, oh, I'm Irish. I'm beating the Brits. And I think the unionists felt like that was, these guys are meant to be the brokers for peace, and they're kind of letting, Jerry Adams meet the president over in the US. So it was just very important for everybody to feel like they had an equal voice at the table.
Sure.
And I'd say a lot of unionists in Northern Ireland nowadays would probably feel like it's overcorrected, and Catholic and nationalists are getting too much things in their favor. And it's not the way it used to be, or blah, blah, blah. All of this fear-mongering stuff. Most people just want to live. Most people don't really care what side, what they're being branded as by other people. They just want to be prosperous and have a good life, So that's where the Alliance Party comes in. The Alliance Party is a growing party in Northern Ireland, and it's just down the middle. Come into this party. We don't care what side of the fence you're on. Just come into this party and let's run the government. But of course, both sides are calling it, you're just a nationalist party, a thinly veiled nationalist party. But it's always hard to tell. But the Good Friday Agreement ended up pushing people further into their trenches. It brought peace, but it put people in their trenches, and those trenches just got deeper and deeper over the past 30 years. There are more peace walls in Belfast now than there were 30 years ago. And a peace wall is a giant about 2 stories or 3 stories high fence in between communities. Because Belfast is small, and some of these Protestant communities live next door to Catholic communities. And at night time, disaffected working class youths are not happy. They want to attack these areas. They want to throw bottles and bricks over. So these walls have had to come up, and there's significantly more now. There's significantly more now than there were 30 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's kind of it's a little bit of it's like a sour happy ending, because it sounds like the biggest priority with the Belfast Agreement or with the Good Friday Agreement was we just need to do something to quell all of this hostility. But like you said, there were no bridges built. There was no real reconciliation.
Guys, I can do another 15, 20 minutes, by the way, so don't feel like you need to wrap up, just a heads up.
Hey,
so,
yeah.
To answer that question, like, I kind of just say it's just too close. It's just too close. So right now, the two people leading Northern Ireland are Sinn Féin's Michelle O'Neill and the DUP's Emma Little Pengelly. Mm-hmm. Both of these ladies, both of their fathers were paramilitaries. So I'm not too sure as the extent of their violence, but so that's one layer away from the violence. That's pushing it back one generation, as to where 10 years ago, like a lot of the politicians had direct connections to this violence. Mm-hmm. And I just think this needs to keep happening. There's just keep the generations pushing away from the ones who carried out the acts of violence. And that's the only thing that can work, but that's only going to take time.
Yeah.
One of the things. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, John. Go ahead.
I was going to say, is there a sense like, do the opponents of Northern Ireland resent the fact that there's the connection between those leaders and the paramilitary? And on the flip side, do the Northern Irish appreciate that connection to the paramilitary?
It's hard. Well, let me think about that. No, I think for the most part, like, okay, you see in the Republic of Ireland, Sinn Féin have been doing pretty well. They've been doing better than they've ever done in a long time, actually. And now they've taken a hit recently because, anyway, it's a long story, but it's kind of funny. But like you see a Sinn Féin councillor get elected in some rural part of like Ireland, and he'd be celebrating, and then he shouts, "Chucky on law," which is a IRA slogan, "Our day will come." And then he'll kind of the next day, like he'll be admonished. He'll be like, "You can't do that. You can't." Yeah. So. And then the opponents of Sinn Féin will say, "Oh, there we go again. The mask slipped. You know, you're just a violent Republican underneath your mask of trying to be a peaceful politician."
Yeah.
So it's a very, very fine line. It's a very fine line between the two. Because, you know, I think there's space to want to have a united Ireland and not believe in being a violent Republican. But like, you see, it's very easy to get points against Sinn Féin, to use them as a punching bag, because all you need to do is go, you know, if you're any politician, you want to attack Sinn Féin, you just go, well, do you regret the violence that happened during the Troubles? And for a Sinn Féin councillor, it's very hard to answer that question, because it's a bit of in a way, they have to in a way support it, because it was to support the liberation or whatever, you know. But at the same time, to say you're supporting violence in a political sphere is an unwinnable statement. Right. So it's very often thrown at them. Like, I think they try and, I think the Unionist side would have a little bit more degrees of separation from, I think on the whole, the Unionist politicians and the Unionists who carried out acts of violence were a little bit further away. Whereas I think it's a little bit different when it comes to the Nationalist Sinn Féin. It was a little bit more interchangeable, you know, like Martin McGuinness, who was the chief of staff for the IRA. And by all accounts, everyone I've talked to, he was quite a fierce man, but, you know, he was the Minister for Education. So that was kind of, you know, for the Unionist side, that was, seeing this guy who wears a balaclava, who had been wearing a balaclava and executing people, was now holding babies and kissing babies and going around school. I think a lot of Unionists just found that unforgivable. They couldn't get over that. Mm-hmm. They couldn't get over nationalists who were violent and were not. A lot of Unionists kind of said, "You'll always be violent." Mm-hmm. And again, these are very, you know, broad ways of stating them.
Sure. Yeah.
To maintain.
So what was your question?
One of the things that I remember we talked about before we even started our podcast was this idea, at least in our view, that in the West, especially, that history is church history. I mean, they're so bound up together. So hearing this story today, hearing kind of like even your like front lines report, you know, of like what is the mood in Ireland, in Europe, concerning the church, nationalism, like what's going on? To me, one of the things, my takeaways is just that there is a heavy burden on the church to be walking in a manner that Christ would have the church walking in, because if their church doesn't do that, there's always tons and tons of pain, and oftentimes a lot of bloodshed. And it's interesting. I made me think of this when you were talking about how, like, in order to resolve the ongoing conflicts, there's some time that needs to take place. People who are second, third generation. I think about that, like in America, when we look back on like kind of our church heritage, we look back to Europe, obviously, and there's these religious wars that took place between Catholics and Protestants, and Calvinist Protestants and Lutheran Protestants and the Anabaptists, and they were all killing each other. And today, at least in America, the mood is like there's no desire for any of that. Like there's the arguments that happen, but it's almost hard to understand what could have led to that level of aggression. And post Christendom is a big part of that. But anyway,
is that not happening now though? Like, our
what's
religious
that?
But like you're saying, it's hard to understand that level of aggression that happened back then, but that's still happening now. No, you're seeing
There's not at least in America and in Europe today. I mean, like you don't have Catholic armies or like a Calvinist army squashing Anabaptist revolt. Like there's not that level of integration between the church and the state as there was like directly post Christendom, is what I'm saying.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. I think that, well, at least we find in our context that there's a lot more interest in cooperation amongst various groups. I think not wanting to go back to that
under the banner of Christianity. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. I guess there's still religious strife all like India, Pakistan are still, that's a Hindu-Muslim kind of conflict.
Oh,
like
yeah.
Oh yeah.
Muslim conflict, Israel, Palestine. People are still carrying out significant acts of violence in the name of their perceived religion. But again, it does also go back to territory. So
Yes.
Right.
I mean, I think I would 80% agree with where you're coming from, Tom. I do think that the issue that we see historically, and I think this even ties into India, Pakistan, I think it ties into Israel, Palestine, is that wherever religion is also tied into influence, power, authority, kind of the ability to shape the culture into a way that kind of coddles the preferences of one religious viewpoint over another, when those sands start to shift, there's going to be pushback. Especially when there's such a wide disparity. Because I mean, like you can see that. I think you can sort of see it in Israel. I mean, Israel is like a Jewish state. They're not like a hyper Jewish state where they're like enforcing Judaism everywhere. But like where there's types of cultural differences like exist, there can be pushback. And I think one of the concerns that I have when I look at American Christianity is like those cultural sands are shifting. Like, what is going to be the long-term response of the church? Are we going to be able to say, okay, well, now it's time to shift into small-term influence and just kind of sharing Christ as is appropriate? Or is there going to be like kind of a forceful pushback? That's kind of the thing that I'm concerned about. So I don't know. I do think that we're not as aggressive as our ancestors, but I don't also think it's still in our DNA a little bit. I don't know.
But I guess I'm curious why do you think, like if you look at like the Christian umbrella in the US, what are we talking here? Thousands, tens of thousands of religions have kind of popped up under this one. Does everyone feel the need to interpret God that fits in with their values and their ethos and their system? Like, and is that cohesively, is that a good thing for the church or for Christianity? I guess I find that quite interesting how there's such a massive, I've drove a very interesting woman, a Baptist from North Carolina before, and like she believed she was the holiest person in the entire world, but the words she was saying that I'd never heard spoken in the car were pretty graphic. And it's just funny how you can see yourself, washed in the blood of or whatever, but then you act in such a way that I'd consider disgusting,
Of course.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a very real, actually, I was just last night, I was talking with some friends about this, like uh, a really fair critique coming from Catholics towards Protestants, in particular, American Protestants who are extremely divisive, very prone to splintering and just starting a new thing, is that, uh, the claim is that, like, well, we don't have a pope, but when you walk away from that, then you end up in an environment where everybody's just their own pope. And if you study American church history, it's like, I mean, I don't even have my head fully wrapped around just how many different uh, little subgroups they are, and the smaller they get and the weirder they get, they oftentimes branch off into what I would consider to be like a pseudo Christian cult. Like it's
Yeah.
not even
You ever
a
hear of the
thing.
Shakers?
Yeah.
The
Yep.
Shakers, yeah.
They find furniture and they didn't believe in procreation, so they died out.
Yeah.
Not a great strategy for growing a religion, I would say.
Great furniture, though, apparently.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting question. I mean, our perspective is that there is streams in American Christianity that are very well connected to historic Christianity, connected to, even the Catholic Church. And then there's some that are really splintered and don't have any sort of meaningful presence because of how divisive they are. But yeah, I'm not sure if that really answers your question, but
Yeah.
it is fascinating.
I'm not even sure if I just kind of.
No, I think it's a super valid observation, especially because American Christianity has kind of grown into this unicorn that I think does look really strange when you compare it to like European Christianity, which has like a very robust tradition. And for Americans, our tradition is almost that it's so individualized.
Yeah,
And
ours won't change and hasn't changed,
right, right. And sometimes to its detriment, right?
Hmm.
Yeah. And so I think, one thing that I think was really impactful for me, and this was one of the earlier episodes that we did, was we looked at this very old historic document from like maybe the 1st or 2nd century called the Didache, which was basically just like a very simple document that kind of structured what the early churches did. This was before Constantine. This was before widespread Christian influence, when they were still kind of meeting very, very quietly, kind of in their own little circles. And it just kind of broke down what the people did, and it spoke about how they gathered on the Lord's Day, how they worshiped together, how they supported one another, how they specifically like looked for the vulnerable and the weak in their communities to take care of them, and how they just like were very focused on the person of Jesus Christ. And so for me, when I think about what historical Christianity is and should be, I just think about those fundamental ideas of like, are we gathering together? Are we nourishing community? Are we supporting the people around us? Are we looking out for those in our neighborhood who are weak, who are broken? And when I think about what the future of Christianity is and what my longing for Christianity is, not just here in America, but especially places like Ireland where they have so many skeletons in their closet, I'm like, can we return to something that is so much simpler, but also a million times more rich, where we're not trying to fight for spots in politics? Not to say that that's a bad thing, but can we like start with the small term, community centered, like local, like what good is it to fight for a space in parliament if you've got hungry, broken people who live 50 yards from your house? Like, that is like such an easy place to start. And so yeah,
I think you've done into consideration like it's a very traumatized country at the same time,
absolutely, yeah.
Really, like, it's a country, the entire country needs therapy in a way.
Yeah.
It's kind of a tough way. So, but I guess my little defense on that is all of those things that you said, I fully believe, but I believe inherently it's in the humans. I don't necessarily, I don't see why a book or a teaching should dictate that's how we're moral. I feel like we're moral inherently anyway. And
Yeah.
I think that's kind of where I still have to find space to marry in between the two. But I think it's in a human, and I don't want to attribute it to a religion. I don't see the need to in my eyes.
Yeah, yeah, I understand. And you know, I heard this quote that I'm probably going to butcher right now, which was that to be as Christ has called us to be is not to be a good human, but is to be a true human. Like it is recognizing all of these human longings and it's like expressing it fully. And I think I think back to like Tom Holland, that British historian who's basically said that for all of the pitfalls of Christianity in the Western civilization, Christianity has informed what humanism is and has given an authority to this sense of what morality looks like. Like humans, unfortunately, can be all types of immoral when you look at, the Mongols and the Assyrians and all these empires that had all these different sets of morality. Like Christianity is giving us this sense of like love for the broken that a lot of other cultures haven't had. And I think there is something valuable about saying this is a divine principle. Like this is something that transcends what it means to be human, and it's actually really rich and beautiful. But also, I don't want to argue. I'm not trying to be oppositional to you at all.
Oh no! I'm very interested in opening up dialogue. That's what I believe in. That's what there's a massive lack in.
Yeah, yeah.
We need to just be able to talk to each other. Otherwise, we end up in very, very deep trenches.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. I agree. Tommy, I see you're holding your mic up.
Yeah, I'm just curious, like, where do you see? So I'm really excited to dive into to your work that you've done. Where do you see this going? Like, how much do you have in the tank still?
Oh, I didn't think I'd get to 50 episodes, and now I'm on 60 with about a load more in the tank.
I think you're 70, brother. I was just looking. I think it says you have 70.
Well, I'm getting up there anyway. But well, it's just, again, the confidence has kind of gone up now with the couple of live shows, a couple of awards and stuff. And
Great.
with that, it kind of means I'm more confident to reach out to other people. I think it's really important. I hate the concept of a person from County Meath talking about, the people up there and the people up there and the people up there. So it's really more important for me to get people on to tell their story rather than me try and tell their story.
Yeah.
So yeah, focus on that and maybe expand out to more global conflict. I really, really want to start something on Israel-Palestine that's very similar in vein to what I do now. Every single person I've said it to said don't. So that makes me want to do it more.
You should. I mean,
because they'll look at an Irish guy and they're like, "Oh, you're biased. All of Ireland loves Palestine." But like I've been told you'll be biased. But like I've been told all these things for coming into the Troubles. You'll be biased because you're Irish. You'll be biased, and I think the proof is in the content that I've made.
I've been impressed even hearing you talk today. Like I've been impressed with what seems to be a really balanced view. I mean, I've caught hints of like you're not a robot. Like you've been able to distinguish. This is good, that wasn't. But yeah, I can see that your podcast has been successful, and that it's not like you're not just creating some sort of political hit piece for one side or the other.
Yeah, no, I think it'll kill it kill the integrity of it if that was the case.
Yeah. Are a lot of your listeners actually from Ireland, or do you find it's like more people from like outside? Because like, to be honest, my interest in this is because like I saw Patriot games, like 10 years ago or whatever. It's like, and there's like this kind of almost like mythologized idea of the Irish Troubles. Where are your listeners mainly coming from?
30%, 30%, 30%. Ireland, UK, and the US, and then the rest of the world. Kind of Irish diaspora countries, so Canada, what's the other one? Australia. So, but no, it's and it's unfortunately that means for advertisers on the podcast, they're not interested. Advertisers want it to be all in one country. You can't advertise Manscaped across 3 countries, and I'm not advertising Manscaped, even though I was approached. But so it's a hard one to kind of figure out a way to to get that you make something that you're very proud of. It feeds the soul in ways I couldn't imagine. You get reviews that say like this changes how I look at the world. And that's amazing. That's really, really amazing. But there is also the other side of it where it's monetizing and podcasts and all that sort of stuff is a different cup of tea, you know. So
Yeah.
I'm in between two worlds now. I really love my job as a guide, and I really love my job podcasting, but I don't really know where the future is for them. But they both require a lot of work, and I'm convinced I have severe ADD or something because I cannot hear the person right. Drives me insane. So
So
we'll see. Yeah.
if we have someone that wants to hire you as a guide, how do they find your services?
Oh, just look me up on the podcast. I guess Troubles Podcast. The Troubles Podcast is the name of the podcast.
Hmm.
My company is MGF Chauffeur Service that I run with my father. But yeah, just look me up.
Cool.
I'm contactable everywhere. Like usually the Troubles Podcast. Troublespodcast@gmail.com is probably the best one.
Okay. Perfect. Well, dude, yeah, again, I appreciate this so much. This was a fantastic conversation. I appreciate all of your insights, and I'm grateful for your time. In many ways, I feel like as different as our kind of topics are, I think that we're both in a very similar camp of, like you said, kind of speaking to a traumatized public. And I think that one of the best ways that you can start helping facilitate that kind of healing is just by telling the story. And I think that you're a fantastic storyteller, and I appreciate what you're bringing to the world right now. So keep it up, man. And hopefully we can chat again sometime in the future.
Yeah, I feel like we could definitely flesh out more of a conversation.
I agree. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We appreciate you all for listening. Oisin, once again, thank you so much. How was that one? I didn't think about it before.
7.6. 7.6.
Let's go. All right. On the money. All right. Well, guys, thanks so much. We'll chat with you again real soon, and take care.